Okay. Okay, I'm going to call the meeting to order. Hey. I actually have one at home. I should have brought it. So are we ready? Okay, so I don't have any announcements, but John Summer wants to talk to you a little bit about BioBlast, and then we're going to turn it over to Darsha, who is going to introduce our speaker tonight. And it's somebody that I really look forward to this presentation. I wasn't able to listen to it at BioBlast, but now I get my chance. So let's go.
Hello, everyone at home. This is kind of weird for me.
Yeah.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is John Summer. I'm president-elect, so I will be president of CAM next year, and I'm really looking forward to serving you all in that position. I have also been on the BioBlast Planning Committee for the BioBlast 2024, and I wanted to announce to everybody, if you didn't see it in the newsletter, that the AMN board voted unanimously to go ahead and set a date and location for BioBlast for 2025. Based on surveys that we got back from the folks that attended, we found there was an overwhelming desire to have it in the fall instead of in June. And so therefore we are, believe it or not, Rockefeller Institute, was pretty well booked up already for next year in October, but they had the dates of the 3rd through the 5th. So Friday through Sunday, 3rd through the 5th of October. Next year, 2025, we will be having BioBlast. And we had a great response on the surveys. We had about 119 people or 115 people that attended. And almost 70 of the people that attended actually responded on the survey. So that was fantastic. And they gave us a lot of good feedback, which we will be taking into consideration and putting into play for next year's event. So I'd just like to encourage everybody to put it on your calendar. Dates October 3rd through 5th, 2025 for BioBlast next year. And it's going to be even better than it was this year. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Alex? So I usually interrogate our speakers just for a minute.
Okay.
Don't worry, I'm good at it.
Putting BioBlast on my calendar.
Okay, good. We like that in a speaker, a subject matter expert. I have a couple of questions for you. We know you're a biology professor.
Mhm.
And when did you start liking bugs?
I think I've always liked bugs. So growing up, so I grew up in Colorado, so it's dry and it's, cold there. So we don't have nearly as many bugs as we do like somewhere like here. But my parents had lived in Guatemala for a while before I was born, and they had this big rhinoceros beetle that they kept. And I just always was fascinated by it. It had like these big horns, and I just thought it was so cool. So that was probably like, so I've always been interested in bugs.
Okay, good. Yeah. And then you went to school in the Denver area and at Colorado State, right?
Yeah.
And then you did your graduate studies at University of Oklahoma.
Yes.
So Boomer Sooner.
Right. Yeah.
I'm also a
I'm not-
graduate.
Oh, you are? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm not a big sports ball fan.
Well, I mean, it's kind of embarrassing to have the school be known for that, but my field, geology, it's got a reputation there too. What was one thing that was really different about living in Norman?
Oh man, so many things were different. I mean, it's so flat there. It's flat, like you'd have to drive 90 minutes if you wanted to go hiking somewhere, and then it was kind of mediocre.
Did you ever swim in Lake Thunderbird?
No. Yeah, I never really
And
wanted
what
to.
color is like Thunderbird?
Oh, yeah, it's red. So yeah, they call it like dirty bird.
Yeah.
It's completely opaque.
It-
Yeah, well,
It's their water source for Norman. So, yeah. Did you ever hunt for rose rocks there?
I didn't. So my husband Walter is from Oklahoma, so he grew up in Oklahoma City and lived in Norman for a long time. So he brought me some rose rocks once. I
Yeah.
don't think I ever really went out and looked for them.
Yeah,
on my
yeah,
own.
it's kind of a local thing to do, even if you're a geologist. But yeah. And what was different about Arkansas coming here?
Well, so I usually say coming to Arkansas from Oklahoma was a nice change. Like after, because I don't really miss Colorado. It's too cold, it's too dry, it's too expensive. But so coming to Arkansas was like some of the things I liked about just nature and, you know, topography and clear flowing water. So yeah,
Pretty
I like it a lot.
incredible.
It's very pretty.
Okay, well, I'll let you get going on your talk. I just wanted to give people a little bit of an idea of who you are. And we're really glad to have you here.
Oh, thank you.
And I'll have a couple of questions afterwards too.
Okay, great. All right, well, thank you everyone for having me, and hello to the people on Zoom. So BioBlast presentation, is that true? Okay, well, I've really like shortened it down and I took a lot of the sex and genitalia and stuff out, but we we can still talk about that. I just okay. Well, I still have all the slides. I just kind of moved them. Okay, so I am from make sure that this is gonna work. There we go. So I'm coming from Hot Springs. I'm involved with the Diamond Lakes Master Naturalists. So I did my PhD research on damselflies. So raise your hand if you know what a damselfly is. Okay, so a lot of you, and if you don't, that's okay. They're basically they're all lumped into the same group with dragonflies, but they're a little bit different. They're smaller. So this was me in Mexico. I had a lab mate in grad school who studied neotropical giant damselflies, and so they have this super long, super skinny, weird abdomen. But the ones I studied were North American, and they're pretty small, like maybe inch and a half long. And so I studied, I'm an evolutionary biologist, so I was interested in how new species form, you know, early in that process where two different groups are becoming different species, what prevents them from breeding with each other. So that's what I studied. So this is an outline of what I'm going to talk about. So we'll talk just about, you know, what odonates are, the difference between dragonflies and damselflies. We'll talk about life cycle and mating. If you want to, you know, I could spend 2 hours talking about mating because that is a lot of what I studied. Ecology, and then a little bit about how to identify different odonates. And then I will show you some odonates that you're likely to see around that you may be able to identify. So odonates are one of the oldest orders of insects. So if we look at a evolutionary tree, the two oldest kind of winged insects are dragonflies and mayflies. So they've been around for a really long time, or that is, you know, the ones that we see today are descendants of really, really ancient, some of the first insects to have wings. There are about 200 species in Arkansas. And so about 300 million years ago, dragonflies were a lot bigger than they are today. So there are fossils that have been found in France where dragonflies had a wingspan of 70 centimeters. So very, very big. So they're not that big today, but it's thought that they probably ate things similar to what they eat today. So they've always been carnivores. Okay, so what makes an odonate an odonate? They've got a particular type of wings. So they have these really big wings with lots and lots of crossveins. They have this long, thin abdomen, huge eyes. Sometimes they take up like almost all of the head. In some species they're smaller, but they're still very large. Really small, you usually don't even notice. So the images, you can kind of see them sticking out from between the eyes. But when you think of most insects, like you think of them having big long antennae, and on odonates, they're like you can barely see them. So in a minute, actually, I'll just pass this around now. So I didn't bring very many specimens, but I did bring this one box so you can see. This is a dragonfly. This is one of the larger families of dragonflies, and then a few different damselflies. Looks like one really didn't survive the trip, but this will give you one. So it's usually missing its head and its abdomen. But you can get an idea of just how tiny they can be. But also when you look at these, you'll notice like you really can't see the at all. Pass those around. And then also they have chewing mouth parts. So if you pick one up, or if you catch one and put your finger by its mouth, it can kind of nibble on you. But they're not malicious, they don't bite, they don't drink blood. They are carnivorous, but they eat, other like soft-bodied insects. So they really don't bite and they don't sting, even though sometimes there's a misconception that they sting. Because they have this long abdomen and often have these appendages that stick out from the abdomen that people might think are a stinger, or sometimes they might try to lay eggs on someone and that makes them think they're being stung. But they don't. They're harmless to humans. Oh, and I wanted to say, if you have questions, please ask them. As they come up.
First fossil, because it's such soft bodied animals. How is that? How do you have those fossils?
I'm not a geologist, so I don't entirely know how.
In shale, it's really quiet water and it's in.
Okay.
They're preserved certainly only in like shale and a really anoxic environment. They're darker shales where they're found with all the soft parts preserved. In fact, most insects, you only get the soft parts. So there are other arthropods that have harder parts, like trilobites are really closely related to insects, but I'll talk to you. Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's actually something that I hadn't really given much thought to. All right, so they have, as insects, they have a life cycle that involves different forms at different times and different levels of maturity, and their life cycle is very much tied to water. So they as larvae live in water. The larvae hatch out of an egg that was usually laid underwater or in a plant that's in water, or in something moist or very close to the water. So the eggs need water, the larvae live in the water. And then when the larvae are mature and they're ready to emerge into an adult, they will crawl out of the water and then have their final molt into the adult form that has wings. And then from that point on, they're terrestrial, they live on land, but then when they mate, they have to go back to the water to start the cycle again.
The larvae, they overwinter, can they overwinter?
Yeah, they usually do.
In plant material or they just
Usually in like sediment at the bottom of the body of water. Yeah, so usually the eggs don't overwinter, the larvae will hatch, and then the larvae will overwinter.
I thought I had heard one time that they basically spend like 3 years underwater and then come out just for a very short time to mate and die. And usually when we see them, they're that's at their final stage of life, which is actually very short, like a month or something. Are those accurate statements?
Yeah, so it varies. So a lot of the questions that you're probably going to ask in this section, the answer varies because it depends on one, like the location and how cold it is, but also just different species. And dragonflies are bigger, so they often require more time to develop than dragonflies. And so some might spend like a few months as larvae. Some might spend like 9 months as larvae. Some do take a few years. So yeah, I think I've heard like 6 years is kind of on the like really high, extreme end. And I think most are more like 1 to 2 years. And so this is just an example of a damselfly at the different stages. So one of the things I did for my research was I collected eggs from some mating pairs in Montana and then reared the offspring because I thought that they were hybridizing and I wanted to raise all these hybrid offspring to do this genetics experiment. And so in a greenhouse in these big like artificial schemes, they took about 9 months to go from egg to adult. And so as they go, just like all insects molt as they grow, we're actually all arthropods. So the first larvae that hatches under the egg is really tiny, and then as it gets bigger, it starts growing a new exoskeleton under its current one, and then it will break open the old exoskeleton and then come out with a newer, bigger one. And then this is one. So once they're ready, they do go through changes. So all their their reproductive organs and their wings are developing as they grow, and so you can really kind of see them. So after a certain stage in the larvae, you can actually, if you look at the underside, you can sex them. Just looking at their sort of developing external genitalia, they start developing these wing pads, and then they will crawl out of the water and come out. And so their wings, I just like, when a butterfly first comes out of its chrysalis, the wings are really compressed and they will expand over a few hours. Another really cool thing about the larvae is they have this unique lower lip. So see if I can play this.
Curiosity.
I don't think I can, so since I'm playing this in PowerPoint and I've got the Zoom going, I can't like change the time because I didn't want to play the whole thing. There was just a certain part that I wanted to play. And with the screen sharing and everything, I'm gonna skip this, but they have this, go back to this picture. They have this this lower lip, it's called a labium, that usually they keep like tucked under their mouth. And so then they'll sit, they're not super active as larvae, so they kind of hide in like leaf litter and sediment. And then when prey goes by, so like mosquito larvae, other insect larvae, sometimes, especially like a dragonfly larvae, it might eat a small fish. And so it can snap this lip out really quickly, and often they have kind of like hooks on the end to grab it and then bring it back to the mouth. Kind of, yeah. So yeah, kind of like a frog's tongue, and the speed that it can go out, but then it's often like very hooked, and pointy at the end. And then when they're not using it, they just kind of tuck it under their body, and you wouldn't even. That's it. Yeah, so that's it, like kind of hot as it's snapping out. So as right after they emerge, They're called tendrils. And so if you ever see a dragonfly that looks very sort of like shiny, kind of almost see-through, really iridescent, they're very soft still at this point, so you really shouldn't touch them. And so it can take a few hours for them to harden where their wings are sturdy. And so they can still fly when they're like this, but not very far. So they're really vulnerable to predation at this point. You know, or if they fall, their wings can get crumpled and they might not form properly. And so then once they are hardened, yeah, it's okay. Your question, I'm not sure if I fully addressed your whole question. So yeah, so we talked about the larval stage being, you know, a big part of their life. And so what we usually see as adults is toward the end of their life cycle. And so usually we you know, kind of like cicadas, you know, not quite as extreme, but cicadas might spend, you know, 13 years developing as larvae, and then we just see the adults for a few days. And so again, it varies. That damselflies that I studied, they would live on average like 2 weeks. Some dragonflies might live longer, like a full summer, or in somewhere that's, you know, more like the tropics. I'm actually not sure how long they can live, but like in a temperate region like this, the adults, they would die, you know, at the end of the summer. So they don't overwinter as adults. And so the adults, you know, one of their main biological goals is to mate and pass their genes on. And so sometimes they might need a few days to eat and kind of, you know, especially the females, they need to get nutrients put into their eggs. But then eventually they will find a mate. And so often if you go like to the water, and you see a lot of dragonflies flying around, most of them are males, and the females will kind of hang out somewhere else, and they don't go to the water until they're really ready to mate. Because usually when if a male sees a female, they'll just kind of mob her and try to get her to mate. So the females try to avoid being harassed until they actually have eggs that are ready to be fertilized. And so oatnecks also have a very unique way of mating that it explains why females kind of avoid places where there are a lot of males. So if a male wants to mate, he will grab the female by either her head or behind her head. And then she can't really escape at that point. So if she wants to mate, she has to cooperate to get into the mating position. But if she doesn't want to mate, she just has to wait for the male to let her go. And so it can really, you know, be a waste of the female's time if she's not interested in mating. So if she is, she will curl her abdomen up where the male's penis is, which is not at the end of the abdomen where the sperm come out, but up on the second abdominal segment. So it's a weird acrobatic position that they have to get into. It's called a copulation wheel. And so sometimes you might see them flying around, or you might see them perched. But when they're together like that, they are mating. And then often when they're done mating, the male will keep holding on to the female and kind of stay with her while she lays her eggs. So so females can mate more than once, and males want to make sure that when a female is laying eggs, they've been fertilized by his sperm and not another male's sperm. And so that's why he will stay hanging out, you know, with her while she's laying those. So males also have a penis that's kind of like shovel shaped or has bristles on it, and so they can actually remove other male sperm from the female's reproductive tract. So I moved those slides. I do have some pictures. I can show them to you at the end. So different species lay their eggs in different places. So like a lot of damselflies, they have kind of a little blade on the female's ovipositor and she'll lay them inside plant tissue. As far as I know, it doesn't harm the plant, but it helps protect the egg from like parasites and predators. Some lay their eggs directly in the water. Some lay them above the water, like in moist wood or moist plants. So this is just an example of damselflies at the lake. So if you see them like flying over water in the stand-up position, they're looking for a place to lay. So I was holding this piece of vegetation. They came and landed on it. They didn't actually try to lay eggs on it. So in these species, the females will actually kind of crawl down the plant and go completely under the water. And then at that point, the male will let go, but he might kind of hover around to monitor what she's doing. And then they might stay underwater for like 20 minutes laying eggs. And then when they're done, they just kind of pop up and fly away. So most types of freshwater habitats can support odonates. So some like ponds, some prefer low flowing streams. So they do have certain requirements, like they're not going to be in a really fast stream that would wash all their larvae, downstream. They also need some sort of vegetation to be able to like have shelter for the larvae, have oviposition sites, so places to lay eggs, and then also places where the larvae, when they're ready to molt into adults, a place for them to crawl out and do that. What do they eat? They're carnivores, both as larvae and as adults. So pretty much anything smaller than them that they can catch, they will eat. So they definitely do eat a lot of mosquito larvae and other insect larvae, and then as adults, they also eat adult mosquitoes and other flying critters. Oh, and they will. I just got this photo a couple weeks ago. We were out and we saw. So here's one damselfly here, which I'm pretty sure is a female, eating another damselfly. Its head, its eyes are over here. So they will definitely eat other odonates as well. Often, yeah. Yeah.
Times where I'm out, they just photography and getting excited about a butterfly. I mean, by the time the show clicks, here he comes and the butterfly is gone.
Really?
Butterfly and it's stupid and I'm like, ooh,
Yeah, I've never actually seen one like eat a big butterfly. I've seen them eat like small moths, but yeah, someone a couple weeks ago showed me a picture of one with a big dragonfly. And if you see them like flying around your yard, like in the late afternoon, there's usually a swarm of small insects that they're eating.
why would them to be sick?
So some are territorial. So some like they're kind of claiming a site that they will use to attract females, and have the females oviposit there. But then yeah, sometimes I think it's just out of convenience. Like they found a spot that they know is good, and then they'll fly and catch something, and I think they just come back because they know it's a good site to
You know, somebody online and
Mhm.
somebody asked a question out here, but I can't hear. the
Oh, okay.
question, So it's kind of.
Okay, yeah, I'm sorry. I will try to repeat those questions. So odonates are also important in the food web as food for other animals. So as larvae, fish are their main predator, so they don't do well in lakes where there are a lot of fish. And then as adults, definitely birds eat a lot of them, frogs. So even when they are near the water, like laying eggs or mating, they can get eaten by a frog. Robber flies are a big one. I see that quite a bit. And lots of birds. So odonates are also good indicators of water quality. So they have certain requirements, for a body of water to be able to carry out their full life cycle. So, for the adults, lay eggs there, and then for those eggs to hatch into larvae, and then for the larvae to reach adulthood. And they're sensitive to a lot of different pollutants like pesticides, fertilizer runoff. So they're also sensitive to oxygen levels. So if you've ever done the stream team surveys, damselfly and dragonfly larvae are, I think they're in the somewhat sensitive category or somewhat tolerant. They're in like the middle category. So
we can find them.
Repeat question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you. So the question was, would you find them in a rice paddy? And I think you would, at least. So I'm not sure. I think you would at least see them there as adults feeding. I'm not sure if any would, lay eggs and everything there, but some do lay eggs in like ephemeral ponds and kind of more short-lived or like shallow bodies of water.
So how sensitive are they to pesticides that may be used in like patties or even the spray of their yards, or are they susceptible to that as well?
Yes, and so the question was how sensitive are they to pesticides? So I'm not sure like exactly how sensitive they are. I just know that they're more commonly found in places that don't have a lot of that. And I don't know how much of that is like that they're sensitive or that their food source, that they rely on is sensitive. So I'm not sure about the intricacies of that. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about how to identify different odonates that you might see. So there are a few things you can look at. How big are they? What do their wings look like? What do their eyes look like? Of course, colors and patterns, but also their behavior. And then also their mating structures, which you usually have to catch one and sometimes look at with a hand gun. And then also, you might need to make a distinction between a male and a female. And so the best way to do that is to look at their butt. So females will have an ovipositor. So if we look at the damselflies, males have these appendages that stick out. They're not always this long, but they often are. Whereas the female, so these are looking from the side. The female just has a much thicker area at the end of her abdomen, and then she has this little ovipositor. So that's where her eggs come out. This is where she's got that blade that kind of helps her saw into a plant blade. Dragonflies are similar. So one difference in dragonflies from damselflies is that both the males and females in dragonflies will have long appendages, but then the female still has an ovipositor, so she's still kind of thicker top to bottom than the male. And then the male has some additional or has an additional appendage. If the female doesn't.
Alan, did you- Right.
I have not mentioned that yet. I think I meant to, so I'll talk about it now. Yeah, so one distinction between dragonflies and damselflies, did I skip that slide entirely? Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, so at rest, a dragonfly's wings are usually sticking straight out perpendicular to its body, whereas a damselfly usually has its wings like up over its back, held together. There are an exception, and they're called the spread wings that I'll talk about. So that's one difference between dragonflies and damselflies. The other difference is size. Damselflies are generally quite a bit smaller and just not as robust. And then also the wing shape is different. So the suborder of dragonflies is called Anisoptera. And so that aniso, that means unequal. So the shape of the hind wing is different from the shape of the forewing, whereas in damselflies, they're basically the same shape. So those are the main differences. Some people get really offended if you refer to a damselfly as a dragonfly. But it's a kind of a pedantic thing. So, I'm fine if you want to put them all and just call them dragonflies. And sometimes that's what I do because most people don't know what a damselfly is. So some other things you can look at to identify different families or sometimes different species is the shape of the wing, how they're held at rest. Sometimes they have distinctive markings. Every dragonfly wing has this little colored cell near the tip called the pterostigma. So that helps give the wing rigidity on the leading edge, so it flutters less as it's slicing through the air. And so those can be different colors. So like on this ebony jewel wing, the females have a black wing, but with a white pterostigma. This one's got reddish pterostigma. And then also sometimes, especially if you have a specimen and you're really trying to identify it to species, sometimes you might have to look at the specific wing venation and how it differs from some other closely related species. It's like the shape and position of like all these different veins. So like for instance, in one dragonfly family, they have this loop of cells in the hind wing that's kind of shaped like a foot. The other families don't have that foot. You can also look at their eyes. So specifically with certain dragonfly families, the clubtails have smaller eyes that are completely separate from each other. The darners, so the one I passed around, that was a darner. So their head, like the top of their head is just eyes. And then they touch, there's this large section where the two eyes touch each other. And then skimmer is kind of in the middle, so they still have very large eyes, but they only touch in one area. They don't touch along the whole sort of underneath the top of the head. And you can also look at behavior. So sometimes how a damselfly perches, like does it perch on a tree trunk? Does it tend to perch on something with its body sticking out horizontally? Does it tend to hang under something? Do they tend to perch on the ground? That can really help you identify different groups as you get more familiar with them. Okay, so are these odonates? Yeah, so usually most people can identify this. What is this? But that's a mayfly. So these do, you can't tell, but they do all have 4 wings. This one, like if you see one of these flying, and I do this too, it will look like a damselfly. Abdomen, the wings are similar shape, but those huge, those are one giveaway. So that's an antlion. That's in the genus Neuroptera. So if you look closely at their wings, the wings are also like the venation is different. But the antennae are the main giveaway that that's not a damselfly. So if you're interested in learning more about dragonflies and damselflies, these are some books I'd recommend. I have these 2 up here if you want to take a look at them. So this one is Dragonflies and Damselflies of Texas and the South Central US is to location. Dragonflies through binoculars focuses on like some of the big dragonflies that you can see and identify without actually having to catch them. But it only has dragonflies, it doesn't have damselflies. And then Damselflies of the Northeast is a really great book, even though it's not specific to this area. So there are going to be things, there are going to be species in here that we don't have and other species that aren't in this book. But it's just really well done in how, in the information and how it's laid out. So I think it's a really good book if you're interested in learning more about damselflies in particular. Okay, so for the final few slides, I'm just going to show you some examples of some common or more common species that you might see. So these are 5 families of dragonflies in the United States. I'm going to focus on the clubtails, the darners, and the skimmers because you're most likely to see them and that they're the easiest to identify. And that I'm going to focus on some that are distinct. So clubtails are named because they have often this very sort of wide area at the end of their abdomen. They also have eyes that are distinct. So among dragonflies, their eyes are somewhat small and they don't touch. They're also often yellow and black or yellow and brown. And so, so you really have to look at like, how much yellow do they have on, the abdominal segment, or what shape is it? Or, sometimes you can also look at like eye color. But, it's often these fine distinctions where like how many stripes do they have, on the thorax, like that. But you can really see from these like why they're called clubtails. They have a very thick area on the end of the abdomen. So these are some common ones. Darners are the largest dragonflies. So you've probably seen a common green darner before. They're really pretty. These are the ones that have, or this family, Eschnidae, are the ones that have the really big eyes. So these guys have almost 360-degree vision. So they can see really well. And all dragonflies are really good aerial predators because they have really good vision and also they're really good at flying. So the common green darner is very green and then also a little bit blue. So that's a male, it's a female. They overall look pretty similar. So they're really big. Their wings are really big. The unfortunate thing about odonates, which you might have mentioned or you might have noticed from the specimens I pass around, is that usually when you preserve them, they don't keep these brilliant colors. They all kind of turn brown. So these are some other darners. So you can also see, so they have a long abdomen relative to the wingspan. And then they also, when they're perching, they tend to kind of hang vertically. And then skimmers, so this is the largest family in North America. These are also, this family contains a lot of species that are easy to recognize, often by their distinctive wing patterns. And so these are the ones that have also, if you catch one and you're not sure if it's a libellulid and you have a hand lens, you can look at this loop of cells in this certain spot on the hind wing, like a foot. Yes.
What is really different from white?
Different how? Oh, thank you. The question was, why are there so many different looking common whitetails? Mhm.
Obvious, then one with the spots on the wings, then one with has no stripes there, but it's multiple brown on them.
Okay, so like these. Do those match them?
Those are different, I mean, common whitetail.
Yeah.
When you see them, they're all common whitetails, that's their name, but
Okay.
different.
I'm not sure. I mean, I would guess it's just like variation within the species. So you're saying the variation is in the wing patterns? Okay, yeah, so the males and females look different. So I do have a slide that shows what the females look like. They actually have they have more spots. But yeah, beyond that, I would say there's probably just a lot of variation like within a species, and why that would be, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if there's a benefit to having a certain, size or shape of the wing spots, like if they help with mate recognition or thermoregulation or something like that. So yeah, I'm really not sure. Okay, so one common skimmer is the eastern pond hawk. These are also very bright green, but distinct from that common green darner in a few ways. One is that they have these stripes on the abdomen. They also, if you remember, that green darner had a much longer abdomen. And then of course you can look at the eyes, and the shape of the eyes is going to be different. This species is one of many odonates that has a phenomenon called senescence, where males, as they get older, they'll develop this kind of chalky coating on their exoskeleton, and so it will completely change their color. So this would be like a young male, this would be an older male. So pennants are one group of libellulids with distinct wings. So there are quite a few in this family that have like many spots on the wings. So sometimes you might have to look at them, either, get familiar with them or wait till they perch somewhere to look at them more closely. Some of them are, that one is. So some I took, some Walter took, some are like Creative Commons, like I got them, on the internet for, it can be. So I'm in the process of putting the image credits on all my slides. You may have noticed I haven't gotten to all of them. I am, but I don't use it as much as I should. So there's a group called the set wings that tend to hold their wings in a unique way, kind of folding them like more forward and pointing the abdomen up in the air. The king skimmers, these are two that you've likely seen. These are pretty common. The 12 spotted skimmer, and then the widow skimmer, which has these dark spots and then white. Also see some on that one. There are also some that are not as, remarkable. Great blue skimmer and slaty skimmer are very similar, but great blue has bluer eyes, and then the slaty skimmer is a little bit darker. Meadowhawks are some of the smaller libellulads. So libellulads also can range a lot in size. So some of them are quite small, and then some are bigger. So these tend to be for the smaller end. I want to say, Walter, did you take that picture? The saddlebags are named for the pigmented area mostly on the hind wing. It looks like they've got saddlebags. And then here are some other common whitetails. Female common whitetail actually doesn't have a white tail. And then she has 12 spots, just like the 12 spotted skimmer. But the 12 spotted skimmer also has white spots between the 12 spots. Okay, so now you got me curious. So I'm looking at this picture. Looking at those wings, I want to go look at the other one and see how it was different. How am I doing on time? Okay, well, I'm intrigued now, so I'm gonna try to look more closely at the whitetails now. Okay. Okay, so finally, there are 3 damselfly families that I'm going to talk about. There are some others. There's a group called sprites that are really tiny, but there don't seem to be any in Arkansas. So these are the 3 damselfly families that you're most likely to see: the spread wings, the broad winged damselflies, and then the pond damsels, which are a huge family. So the spread wings are named because they often have their wings spread when they are perched, rather than holding them together. So these are some that you might see. So these tend to have a very, they're on the larger end of the spectrum for damselflies. They have a very long abdomen. So you're likely to find these like perched on vegetation usually near a pond or a lake. So not flowing water, but it's still water. Whereas the broad-winged damselflies like slow flowing streams. And so you might find these in a stream or even sometimes a ditch. These are also territorial. So the males will hold a territory, and then females will come to that territory to mate. And so you can sometimes see them kind of fighting off other males or doing little displays for the females. So these 3 are the American ruby spots, named for the bright red spot that the male has, and the female does kind of have one too on the wings. This is something else that would preserve them. It all just kind of balance. The smoky ruby spot, similar to the American ruby spot, but has darker wings. And then the ebony jewel wings, which are one of my favorites. They're really pretty and also really common. They have this iridescent metallic body and then these completely black wings. So you can't even see on the male where that pterostigma is, but then the female has a white one. And then finally, the pond damsels. This is a really big group, and a lot of them look basically the same. I'm sorry, so sprites are in this family. So I'm going to focus on dancers, bluets, and forktails, but there's no sprites in Arkansas. And then the Aurora damsel, there's only one species here in that family. So dancers are another very common one. You've probably all seen these. So they tend to perch like on the ground. So if you're out at the lake or something and you see one that's perching on your boat, or it might land on your arm, or like perching on the ground or something near you, this is usually what it is. If you can get close enough, one giveaway is if the spines on the middle segment of their leg, they tend to be longer than on the other segments. They're often blue, sometimes kind of purple. They can be found in flowing water or still water. So here's an example. So this one looks brown. This is probably a female. This purple one is a male. So these are just some examples. So again, we've got pruinescence here on the powder dancer, which is named for that chalky coating that develops. So you can see how when you look at these, they're all blue. These are among the larger of the damselflies, but still, smaller than most dragonflies. And they tend to perch on flat surfaces. So when I had that picture earlier, or that video when I was holding the stuff and the tandem parakeet landed on it, this was that same day. So they're very gregarious, and they will often land on people or kind of hang around. And so you can usually assume that those are Argia if that happens to you. Forktails are very small, often just a few centimeters long. So the best way to see them is just look at the grass and you'll see these, straight little brightly colored things leaving grass. That's really all I'm going to say about those. In the interest of time, they're often blue and green, but there are some examples, for instance, where they're orange, or an immature female might be orange, and then as she develops, she turns blue. And then finally, bluets. These are the group I studied. So not all of them are blue, but many of them are, just like many of the Argia are blue. So sometimes when I just see a damselfly flying around, I don't immediately know always if it's even an Argia or a bluet, because they can look so similar. So this is the most common genus in North America. Like many other species, they have sexual dimorphism, where the female might be a different color or have a different pattern than the males. Sometimes the females can be really difficult to identify as species, and the best way to identify them is find one in tandem with a male and then identify the male. So some that are common around here are the familiar bluet, which is very cosmopolitan. It can live in many different types of aquatic habitats. The stream bluet, seen that one a lot this summer. The double striped bluet. But then there's also, for instance, an orange bluet. So this one is not blue. All right, so that was all I had. So I'm happy to take any remaining questions. Yes.
So if I remember correctly, you had mentioned research crossbreeding between two species of damselflies, and what was the result of your findings on that? Do they not?
Yeah, so the question was about some of my research, which I talked about a little bit more at BioBlast. Yeah, so I'm gonna go through all my slides to try. So I studied two species that there were reports that they were interbreeding. So as I go through, these are some damselfly penises. That you said that was what you all came for. Um, yeah, so the species that I studied, there were reports that they might be interbreeding, and it was really interesting because since the male and female have to get into that tandem position, usually what prevents two species, a male of one species from mating with a female of another species, is that his clasping structures don't fit with her, area where she's grasped by males. And so there's this mechanical, like lock and key concept. And so it turned out that the species that I studied, even though they were really different in both the male and the female morphology, they could still form a tandem. So these are, so I did some micro CT scanning to quantify the morphology differences between these two species. And so the appendages are these paired appendages that are different among the two species. So I've highlighted the left-hand one in red. And so you can see just how different they are. Shape and size, yes, the clasper. So these are what clasp on the human. So they're really different. And yet somehow I also just observed a lot of different interactions between the two species to see, how well could a male of this species take a female from that species in tandem and vice versa. And then these are what the female plates look like. So this is what the male is actually grabbing onto. And so what I found, I also looked at these mechanoreceptors on the female. So like, to look at the idea that, okay, well, if a female can be taken in tandem by a male of a different species, does she have some way of sensing, like, is he the correct female to, is he the correct species to mate with? And so I also looked at, where those were located, where they were most dense. And so I'm trying to get to the kind of some of the main findings here. So in short, I quantified all these different reproductive isolating barriers. So if they, the idea of a species, or one concept of a species, is two species that can't mate with each other and produce viable offspring. And so I looked at, okay, well, are they living in the same place at the same time? Will males try to mate with females of the other species? Can they take females of another species in tandem? If that happens, how likely is a female to mate with them? And then when they have, how many eggs does a female lay after mating with a male of the different species versus her own species? Is there any difference in survival? So all of that. And so I found that, both species could take the other in tandem, and then when they produced hybrids that had intermediate morphologies, they also had medium, reproductive success. But then females were also less likely to mate with males of the other species or with hybrids, but sometimes they did. And so there was definitely a lot of interbreeding going on, but there was, but then when all that sort of pre-mating stuff was bypassed and the two species did mate with each other, there didn't seem to be any so-called post-mating reproductive barriers. So there was no detriment to like the larvae, the egg development or anything. So that might be more in-depth than you wanted to know, but I have the slides. So
were they a hybrid species then?
Yeah, so they would still be considered good species. And it seemed like, and they don't hybridize everywhere. So I would call it more that they were species that, you know, weren't 100% reproductively isolated, but they were getting there. Just because, so even though they were interbreeding, it was more rare, and it also, if you look at the hybrids, if you think of the hybrids being less fertile because they weren't as good at mating with either of the parental species. So that also is a way that they were being selected against. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so they, that was a little bit harder to test because one, there was so much variation in the hybrids. And so this is where things just, you know, there's a reason people do these sorts of studies with like Drosophila, because they're easy to raise in the lab, and they're, you know, it's a well-established sort of model organism. And so so it was really difficult to even like produce the adult hybrids to do these experiments with, to have a large sample size for some of this, and then also to know exactly what their pedigree was. So I would, you know, when I first started all this, I caught females that were in tandem with a male and ready to lay eggs, and I just identified the male as either, you know, species 1, species 2, or a hybrid based on his clasper morphology. But so sometimes I didn't know, like with some of these hybrids that I just caught, like who their parents were, or, you know, were their grandparents hybrids, and then there'd be a lot of, like, I mean, the whole range of intermediate morphologies within the hybrids. So it's complicated. But I don't think that they were prevalent enough, and that the hybrids were like mating with each other enough that it was like they were creating a new species, or that they could all be considered a single species. Zoom folks, I'm sorry that I wasn't repeating the questions. Do any of you have questions? I will see if there's any in the chat. Okay, so Nita said they don't sting at all. What about dogs? Yeah, they they can't sting. Yeah, and I don't think, I mean, if you saw one like land on your dog, they don't have anything pokey that could sting. How vulnerable are their wings, like to injuries? Are there any regenerating abilities? So their wings are pretty rigid, but they can get kind of tattered. So like if you catch one, you know, you can hold it by the wings, and you're not going to hurt them. And especially with dragonflies, like their wings are quite tough. Damselflies' wings are a little more soft, and so sometimes even if your fingers are just like sticky, you can harm them. But sometimes even with a little bit of damage, they still do okay. Kind of like a butterfly, like they can get a little bit tattered and they still do okay. Oh, that's a good question. If a water source dries up over winter, can an odonate larvae survive? If it dries up over winter, I'm not sure. I'm gonna guess that some of them are adapted to that. I know also that some larvae can survive even when their water source ice is solid. Like they can still survive in solid ice. I mean, not as well, but they can survive. Yeah. Yeah, so some, I'm sure there are some that are adapted to like unreliable water sources that can dry up. Or maybe that the larvae, and I'm guessing here, I don't know. I would guess that some can kind of crawl under to where they can stay moist until there's more water. How many eggs do they lay? So that's another thing that varies. So it can be from a few hundred to a few thousand.
Besides behind them was dragonfly, are there any other species that, involved?
So are there any that are like threatened or endangered? Not that I'm aware of, but maybe. Yeah, I would check like the Xerces Society. Yeah, I'm not sure. All right, well, thank you.
What's your favorite place to look for dragonflies?
That's a good question. I mean, honestly, anywhere. Yeah, I'm not sure if I have a favorite place. I mean, I really like Northwoods. So there's like a trail system in Hot Springs that has a lake right by the parking lot. So it's been really good. I think that those ebony jewel wings are probably my favorite. So I'm always excited when I go like to a stream somewhere where there are a lot of those. So actually, after BioBlast, we went to Petty Jean State Park and we saw a bunch there.
And it sounds like we need to line back to talk about dragonfly and damselfly sex.
Well, no, I was thinking I should put together a talk on like the sex lives of insects because they
That'd be nice and learn title.
Yeah.
Get 50 people. We really appreciate.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. No, thank you.
Thank you.
Did I stop sharing? Yeah.
On Zoom. That'll end it all.